Karen, we know you've been job hunting. Your bonus is docked per policy. That line dropped in the middle of the all hands like a fart in church. 1 second we were looking at slide decks about Q4 wins, and the next, Chad Jr., otherwise known as the CEO's son, new head of HR and full-time confidence in a discount haircut, was reading my name off a list like it was a damn warrant. My video was off, thank God. All anyone could see was a little circle with my initials, sitting quietly in the corner while my 20-year reputation got clotheslined by a man who once used vibes as a hiring metric. I didn't speak, didn't flinch. I just clicked my pen and jotted down the timestamp in my notebook, right between a doodle of a skull and a half-finished grocery list. Now, before we go any further, real quick favor. If you're listening and haven't hit that subscribe button yet, go on and do that. Toss a like too. It helps the team keep digging these stories out of the dirt and turning corporate train wrecks into confessionals. All right, back to the funeral I call my job. So there I was, 14 years deep into this company. I'd started when we were still operating out of a strip mall annex, with a copy machine that jammed like it owed the mob money. Back then, nobody knew what compliance meant. It was just me, 3 ring binders, and a prayer. I wrote half the damn infrastructure these clowns were standing on now. Ethics code, whistleblower protocol, vendor integrity agreements. And what do I get for it? A live public flogging over suspicious LinkedIn activity. The irony? I hadn't updated my LinkedIn since 2019, not even a new headshot, but apparently, viewing someone else's profile counts as an HR misdemeanor now, because Chad Jr. needed to flex his authority before his next avocado toast break. After the meeting, my inbox started vibrating like a motel nightstand. A couple of junior analysts, poor kids, sent messages that were clearly typed with shaking hands. Sorry you had to go through that, Karen. We support you. I didn't know they were going to name names. I replied to none of them. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I was already working on something more important. Phase 1. I pulled up the compliance drive, what was left of it, and started scanning for my old files. Some were missing. Others had been renamed or moved, probably to make room for Chad Jr.'s efficiency overhaul. That's what he called it in his memo, written in Comic Sans, no joke. I screenshot that too. The next morning, my access to the performance dashboard was revoked. Just gone. No email, no heads up. One day I was tracking vendor billing metrics. The next I got a 403 error and a shrug from IT. When I asked, they said, per new structure, your role is no longer authorized. Same department I built, same dashboards I created. But here's the thing about being in compliance for over a decade. You don't panic, you document. So I started keeping 2 sets of notes. One on my work machine, sanitized and professional. The other on a private notebook at home, which now had its own dedicated shelf in my closet labeled HR Clown Show. I wasn't angry yet. I was something worse. Calm. Calculating. Because when a man tries to burn you with a match you gave him, the least you can do is make sure he's standing in a puddle of gasoline. The first real crack came that Thursday, during a budget sync. Chad Jr. was grinning like he'd invented capitalism. He introduced new resource reallocation structures, which was code for gutting the compliance team and redistributing headcount to high-growth ops. Translation: his frat buddy's crypto project. The CFO looked skeptical, but didn't argue. Not yet. And me? I just nodded. 12 people used to report to me. By Friday, it was 4. By Monday, 1. And she was a temp. But the funny thing is, every time they erased one of my protocols, they did it wrong. They left breadcrumbs, broken links, mismatched policy versions, edits with no audit trail. It was like watching toddlers tear pages out of a safety manual while the house quietly filled with smoke. So I started saving everything. Email headers, Slack threads, meeting invites where I was removed but still received the auto-forward. I even kept the updated org chart where my box was grayed out like I'd died. And at night, after work, I'd sit in my kitchen with a glass of boxed Merlot and reread section 4.3.2 of the ethics manual. You know, the one I wrote, the one about retaliation, performance metrics, and the total voiding of executive bonuses when policies are breached in bad faith. Turns out, sometimes the most dangerous thing in a company isn't the loudest person in the room. It's the one who remembers where the paperwork is buried. They didn't fire me outright. That would have required a spine. No, they came for me like moths chewing a sweater. Quiet, stupid, persistent. By Wednesday, my team's budget was temporarily frozen for restructuring. By Friday, 3 of my junior analysts were rotated to agile pods, under a manager whose claim to fame was once tweeting a meme about KPIs that went semi-viral in a Lean Six Sigma subreddit. That's where we were now, downsizing by vibe. My shared drive access got patchier than a Midwest thunderstorm. I'd click a folder I built from scratch, 404. Try to reopen a policy doc I'd written. Permission denied. When I asked IT, they blamed cloud migration. Must have been a hell of a storm in the cloud, because every one of my files seemed to be migrating straight into the shredder. On Monday, I got a calendar invite for a compliance sync sent by a junior HR rep who used emojis in her subject lines. I clicked accept, only for it to vanish 10 minutes later with no explanation. A day later, I saw screenshots in a Slack channel, my metrics, my team's data, presented by someone else in a meeting I was never told about. The Sun, that smug boiled chicken in a suit, referred to me in those slides as legacy oversight, like I was some glitchy fax machine they hadn't gotten around to unplugging yet. Then came the email. Short, plain. From Sarah, my old mentee, one of the few I trusted. I'm so sorry. They told me not to say anything. That one hurt. Sarah was the one I stayed late for, coached through her first audit panic, defended when Chad Jr. wanted to ding her for low visibility. And now, she was apologizing from the other side of a silenced NDA. I couldn't blame her. They probably threatened her job with that same wet handshake of passive-aggressive menace they used on me. But that was the moment my pain turned into something else. Something sharper. I opened a private folder on my home laptop. Project Wake Up Call. Inside, I created subfolders. Slack logs, doc access logs, redacted slide decks, vague meeting notes, weird HR memos, and a very special folder simply labeled 4.3.2. I had the receipts. I just needed the pattern. From then on, every time they forgot to CC me, I took a screenshot. Every time they published an edited policy doc without version history, I downloaded a copy and compared the metadata. Every calendar change, every drive permission tweak, every deleted doc with my initials in the footer. I tracked them all like digital termites. They thought they were ghosting me. I was archiving them. And like every good compliance officer knows, policy only matters when you can prove it was broken. I started logging timestamps of when the Sun's assistant shared confidential HR summaries into public Slack channels. Violations. So textbook I could have used them in a training module. Then there was the procurement memo that reused my language but cut out all the sign-off sections. Streamlined approval? My ass. I flagged that under internal control bypass. I even tracked coffee orders. Yes, coffee orders. Chad Jr. had started hosting his stand-ups at a local cafe on the company card. What started as $15 lattes ballooned into $300 tabs with networking incentive, written in the memo. Some genius uploaded a receipt with the whole itemized breakdown into the finance Slack. I saved that faster than you can say IRS audit. Meanwhile, HR was busy pretending I didn't exist. They held town halls on ethical transitions without inviting the woman who wrote the damn ethics code. One all-hands had a slide called Modernizing Legacy Systems, with my department name crossed out in red. The irony nearly gave me whiplash. Still, I said nothing. I smiled in hallways, nodded on Zooms, waved when waved at. I even thanked Chad Jr. for redefining structural compliance during one of his pontifications. He lit up like a toddler on a trampoline. He actually believed it. The thing about these new age execs is they mistake silence for agreement. They think because you're not kicking and screaming, you've accepted your fate. What they don't realize is that some of us were trained to read fine print like scripture, and some of us wrote it. The real joke? Every policy they'd bent, every shortcut they'd taken, every compliance safeguard they'd dismantled to make themselves look efficient, it was all traceable. I'd made sure of that years ago when I standardized metadata tagging on internal documents. They thought they were deleting my work. They were just triggering breadcrumbs. And as they quietly dismantled everything I built, they forgot one thing. It's not the people who shout who burn your empire down. It's the ones who remember exactly where the bodies are buried. The teacup clinked louder than it should have. Maybe because my hand was shaking. Or maybe because Rebecca always insisted on using bone china, even in a cafe that served avocado toast on roof tiles. She said it made her feel like power still had manners. I said nothing and stirred my Earl Grey like I was trying to summon something from the bottom. She watched me over her glasses, the way she always did when she knew I was lying through my teeth. I'd texted her that morning, "Tea?" And she'd replied within seconds, You bringing a laptop or a body? Neither, I said now, forcing a smile. Just need your eyes on something. I reached into my bag and slid the old binder across the table. Gray. Faded. The kind you only keep because you know someday someone will pretend it never existed. Rebecca ran her hand over the cover like she was touching a fossil. Well, damn, she muttered. Version 3.1. This was the one with the executive clawback clause, right? Page 47, I said. She flipped it open like a priest cracking a hymnal. Pages ruffled. Tabs peeked out. Notes scribbled in the margins from a younger, more optimistic me. Back when I still believed policy could protect people. Before I realized it only works if the people in power are scared of the rules. Rebecca's brow lifted. Then her lips parted slightly. You're kidding. What? I asked, sipping my tea like we weren't sitting on a corporate landmine. She tapped the page with her pen. Section 4.3.2. This is airtight, Karen. Airtight. Any punitive adjustment to employee compensation based on unverified employment search activity shall trigger a mandatory internal audit and void the executive bonus pool for the active fiscal quarter. I leaned back. That's the one they used against me. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Used? They invoked it? At the all hands. Said I was job hunting. Canceled my bonus. Called it per policy. Her jaw clicked shut. Then opened again, slowly. Sweetheart, that's the policy you wrote. And they violated it. I shrugged, watching the steam curl off my tea. Didn't think they'd be dumb enough to do it in front of 200 employees. Rebecca sat back in her chair, one hand flat on the manual. So, what's the plan? I don't know. The words came out smaller than I wanted. Weaker. Not the cool, calculated Karen I'd been at the office, logging every deleted file like a librarian in a war zone. Here, in the soft cafe light, I was just tired. Maybe I just wanted to be reminded it was real, I added after a moment. That I wasn't crazy. Rebecca's look softened. You're not. You're just surrounded by idiots with Wi-Fi. She closed the binder gently, like sealing a coffin. This isn't just grounds for HR arbitration. This is policy sabotage. You built their skeleton. They're trying to wear your bones like a costume, and they don't even know how it fits. That got a smirk out of me. Barely. You still have the audit trail? She asked. Everything I can grab without setting off alarms. She nodded approvingly. Good. You always were sneaky. I laughed into my teacup. I prefer methodical. Whatever helps you sleep. She paused. Karen, you do realize you could blow this wide open. If the clause is still active and they're penalizing you without a verified investigation, they kill their own bonus pool. I finished. Yeah, I know. We sat with that for a minute, her thumb tapping the corner of the binder, me tracing a crack in the table like it was a roadmap. I just keep thinking, I said finally. I wrote all this to protect people. From retaliation. From manipulation. I never thought I'd need it for myself. Rebecca tilted her head. That's always the mistake. Thinking we build armor for other people. You built it. You own it. So if someone tries to use it against you, well, that's just poetic justice with a payroll twist. I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. You okay? She asked. I don't know. It's like I'm watching a car crash in slow motion, and I'm the one who installed the brakes. Rebecca sipped her tea. Then maybe it's time you reminded them where the brake lines are. I looked at the binder, at my name typed in the corner of every policy page, at the quiet, invisible authorship I thought didn't matter anymore. And something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just settled into place. They hadn't just ignored me, they'd violated me. They'd taken my work, my ethics, and twisted them like coat hangers to hang their egos on. And now they were about to find out the difference between legacy and leverage. Rebecca stood and grabbed her coat. Text me if you need me to represent you. I thought this was off the record, I said. She winked. It was, but revenge always gets better press when it's fully documented. I watched her leave, my tea going cold. The binder sat there, quiet as ever, but suddenly it felt heavier. Not like a burden, like a loaded weapon. Her name was Maya, 19, maybe 20. Smelled like vanilla body spray and fresh optimism. First week in the office, she wore real slacks and took handwritten notes during onboarding. The kind of intern who still believed in collaboration and career growth. Poor thing. She was also the niece of a friend, which is the only reason I hadn't written her off as a walking HR Trojan horse. She knocked on my door with a legal pad hugged to her chest and said, "Hi, are you Karen? I'm on the compliance rotation. They said to shadow you for policy transition workflows." That was a mouthful of corporate soup, but I smiled and offered her the chair across from mine. She sat like someone expecting a pop quiz. "So," she chirped, "I've been going through the old ethics folders, but HR said to delete anything with a red tag unless it's been updated since 2021. I froze mid-email. Delete them? Yeah. They gave me a list. Said they were cleaning up legacy clutter. I thought I'd check in with you before I did anything drastic, but she looked down at her notes. I've already moved like 15 files to the purge queue. They said not to archive since it's a fresh systems initiative. My eyelid twitched. This wasn't incompetence. This was surgery. They weren't just mismanaging. They were performing a back-alley lobotomy on the company's entire compliance spine and sending in a bright-eyed intern with a butter knife. I nodded slowly. That makes sense, I lied, my voice as smooth as lacquered poison. But going forward, mind ceasing me on any document purge requests, just to keep a paper trail. Maya beamed. Totally. I was worried I was stepping on toes. You're doing great, I said, already pulling up my encrypted drive at home in my mind. That afternoon, I watched her click around the shared folders like a kid in a candy store. I pretended to be on a call while noting which files blinked out of existence in real time. Some of those files weren't just red tagged, they were critical. Old audit memos, vendor red flag reports, early drafts of conflict of interest protocols that still held legal weight. Gone. Poof. With the enthusiastic naivety of a teenager following instructions from the cool kids. By the time she left at 5, cheerfully waving her little tote bag goodbye, I'd already installed a silent sync tool onto my personal machine at home. Every time a compliance file was deleted, renamed, or accessed without proper clearance, it pinged me. I named the folder ARC, because when the waters rise, you build a boat. Over the next few days, I let Maya work uninterrupted. Every time she got a new deletion order, she'd swing by my desk and say, "Just giving you the heads up," like we were coworkers on a sitcom. I'd nod, thank her, then download the last clean version from our backup server and tuck it into my own archive before she hit delete. She never once asked why the backups weren't flagging her removals. They'd shut those off too. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just short-sighted cost-cutting. They were systematically dismantling the legal padding of the company, stripping out the paper trail, making sure if and when something imploded, there'd be no blueprint left pointing back to the ones responsible. No safety net, no ethics guardrails, no Karen. Except I was still there, watching, cataloging, rebuilding the shredded scaffolding one file at a time. One morning, Maya brought me a USB stick. "Hey, they said to re-upload these vendor logs after cleaning the formatting. I don't totally know what that means, but here you go." I took the drive, smiled, and nodded. "Thanks, I'll take care of it." The files were all original vendor dispute logs from 2016 to 2019. Cases I personally handled, redacted, revised, and time-stamped like they were created last week. The new versions stripped entire paragraphs about pricing collusion and procurement irregularities. The formatting wasn't the only thing being cleaned. I emailed myself the originals from my old backup, then printed both copies, old and new, slapped sticky notes on them, labeled each page discrepancy, then filed them in a labeled folder at home. Ethics falsification, intern assisted. The thing about cover-ups is that they rot from the inside, and now I had proof they weren't just clumsy. They were intentional. They weren't revising history. They were deleting it, and they were too arrogant to realize the intern they used as an eraser had CC'd every order to the wrong person. Me. So I played dumb. Let Maya keep chirping updates like she was doing me a favor. Let HR think their little document laundering operation was going off without a hitch. Let the new regime bask in their illusion of a clean house. Because the more they tried to erase me, the more they etched their own fingerprints into every policy violation I'd ever written. And when the flood came, they wouldn't be able to swim in plausible deniability. They'd drown in their own audit trail. It started with a typo. At least that's what I let them think. During a routine Slack thread, routine being generous, Since it was mostly emoji reactions and vague phrases like looping in stakeholders, I dropped a snippet of policy into the chat. Section 2.1.6. The clause about third-party conflict disclosures during invoice overages. Worded it all casual, like, we might want to cross-check this W 2.1.6 before approving any new vendor rates, just in case. 2 minutes later, I got a ping from the HR assistant, Haley, 23, emotionally allergic to punctuation. Hey Karen, can you not use old policy drafts? That one's obsolete, lol. Oh, honey. I didn't reply right away. I clicked over to the policy index, then the metadata, then the version history. Guess what wasn't obsolete? Section 2.1.6. Live. Filed. Last updated 2 years ago. Not deactivated. Not even flagged for review. Haley had pulled that line straight out of someone else's script, probably the Sun's. So I let her sit in that silence while I copied the full compliance index, every active policy, every timestamp, every authorship tag, into a new private spreadsheet on my drive. I titled the sheet, Compliance Ghosts. Then I wrote her back. Oh, my mistake. Thought it was still active. Must have been muscle memory. She reacted with a thumbs up emoji. It took every ounce of professionalism I had not to respond with a middle finger. That same week, while cross-referencing vendor expense logs, something I technically wasn't authorized to do anymore, I found a discrepancy. One invoice from a consulting firm flagged as quarterly strategy refresh. Cost? $14,600. Deliverable? A 3-slide PowerPoint deck with an executive summary that said, and I quote, optimize transformation pipelines via stakeholder realignment. That meaningless pile of MBA word salad had been submitted through the Sun's new Agile procurement flow. The firm's address? A co-working space in Tampa? The signature? Someone named Braden, with a Y. I dug deeper. Found 2 more invoices from the same firm. One for emergency brand alignment, another for cultural diagnostics. Same billing structure, same vague language, different months, different amounts. Same ghost company. It stank worse than the break room fridge after someone forgot tuna salad behind the oat milk. This time, I didn't say a word to anyone. I printed all 3 invoices, cross-referenced them with the policy I wrote on third-party approval, and slid them into a red folder I labeled Q4 Audit Prep. Then I added the chat with Haley. Then I added every obsolete clause that had been flagged as problematic by HR, including 3 more they were actively violating in their daily workflows. By Thursday, I had a folder the size of a textbook, and they still thought I was done. That's the funny thing about stripping someone of authority. If they know where everything is buried, taking away their shovel doesn't help you. It just means you won't see them coming when they dig it all up. I even started sending myself daily summaries at home under boring subject lines like lunch options or Q4 recipe list. Inside, annotated vendor logs, deleted Slack messages, timestamps from doc revisions, even phone call summaries when I overheard interns whispering about cutting through red tape to approve that Braden thing. Braden, with a Y. I'd remember that name if I ever had to testify under oath. Meanwhile, the sun was getting louder, puffier. His pep talks turned into half speeches about modern agility and streamlining legacy systems. He liked the word legacy, used it like a sword. What he didn't know was that legacy doesn't mean outdated. It means something that outlives you. Every time he changed something, deleted something, sunsetted a safeguard, he was dancing through a minefield that I had personally engineered for transparency. He just didn't realize the mines still worked. And I didn't even have to reset them. I just had to wait. They had removed the smoke detectors and handed me the lighter. By the end of the week, I added a sticky note to the audit folder. They think I'm gone. Good. I leaned back in my chair, sipping cold coffee while the sun held another meeting about restructuring compliance to fit a modern lens. He said it with his sleeves rolled up and his chest puffed out. I watched from the back of the room, smiling. They didn't know the woman who wrote the rules was still in the room. And they had no clue that every time they broke one, I wasn't just taking notes. I was building their tombstone out of footnotes and fine print. They gave me a seat at the table that day, but not a voice. One of those long, performative budget alignment meetings where the snacks are stale and the air smells like passive aggression and hand sanitizer. 8 executives, 2 department heads, 1 overconfident nepotism hire in a navy blazer he probably called Power Blue, and me, sitting 2 chairs down, carefully invisible. I brought a folder with me, black, unassuming, neatly tabbed. The kind of thing no one looks twice at unless it's opened. Inside, the past year of compliance metrics, vendor logs, redacted internal flags, and a little something extra labeled unauthorized discretionary adjustments, Q3. About halfway through the meeting, just after the IT lead finished a breathless rant about scaling cloud agility, the CFO leaned back in his chair and tapped his pen against his notepad. "Quick question," he said, not looking at anyone in particular. "Why have our compliance adherence metrics dipped by 17% quarter over quarter?" The room shifted. Quietly. The way it does when someone drops a real question into a pile of rehearsed fluff. The son, Chad Jr., still riding the sugar high of his earlier talent reinvigoration slide, cleared his throat. "Well," he started, "we've been moving away from outdated legacy frameworks. Karen's still adapting to our new priorities, but we're confident we'll realign by next quarter." I tilted my head slightly, like a house cat about to swat a goldfish off the counter. "Actually," I said, voice calm as chamomile, "I brought some materials that might help clarify." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. No drama, no grandstanding. Just the quiet slide of truth across a polished oak table. "Here are the original compliance metrics," I said, flipping to the first tab. "Filed quarterly. Documented by department. You'll see the tracking was consistent through Q2. Then, starting in Q3, discrepancies begin, mainly due to unsanctioned changes in vendor onboarding and revised reporting flows under the new structure." The son scoffed. "Karen, let's not get tangled in the weeds." I didn't even look at him. I kept my eyes on the CFO, who was now flipping through the pages like a man who'd just found a live wire in his soup. "If you want to compare current vendor logs to last year's, you'll find them tabbed in red," I added. Notably, several invoices have been rerouted through a non-compliant pipeline. Cross-reference that with Policy 2.1.6 and 3.4.1. The CFO didn't speak, just paused on one page. His finger rested on a consulting invoice, $18,200 billed for strategic stakeholder ideation. The vendor was Braden & Co. The deliverable? 3 bullet points and a blurry JPEG of a Venn diagram. The son started fidgeting. "We've engaged several innovative external consultants to help modernize our process. It's all part of our dynamic flexibility strategy." That was a lot of syllables for, we're paying someone's buddy to scribble circles in PowerPoint. The CFO glanced up. "Karen, did you write these policies?" "I did," I said, folding my hands politely. "With oversight and legal review. They're still active." There was a beat of silence. You could almost hear the gears grinding behind the CFO's eyes. "Thanks, Karen," he said at last. "I will take a look." He didn't say anything else, but his next page turn was noticeably slower. Intentional. His eyes didn't flick back to the sun. They flicked back to the invoices. That's all I needed. Because here's the thing. When you're sitting in a room full of noise, the sharpest tool is silence wrapped around facts. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't roll my eyes. Didn't even correct the son when he mispronounced fiduciary, like it was a cocktail. I just gave the CFO a mirror. Let him look into it on his own time. After the meeting, the son brushed past me without a word. Haley, his assistant, offered me a half-hearted smile that died before it reached her eyes. "And the CFO?" He left holding the folder. That folder would ruin someone, but not yet. See, I wasn't interested in a dramatic takedown in the conference room. I wasn't looking for applause or gasps. I was planting seeds, and now someone else had started to water them. They'd spent weeks painting me as a relic, a slow, outdated bureaucrat clinging to irrelevant policies. But in that room, for the first time, someone saw what I'd really become. A mirror. And they didn't like what they saw in it. The beauty of policy is that it doesn't scream. It waits. It records. It reflects. And when the light finally hits it right, even the cockroaches can't pretend they don't exist. Let them squirm. I had more folders to build. The quarterly board packet dropped at 8:13 a.m. on a Wednesday like a stale donut on a glass table. Dense, too sweet, and destined to be ignored by everyone who mattered. 92 pages of padded performance charts, inflated projections, and enough buzzwords to give a thesaurus a hernia. But I didn't care about the charts. I was looking for something else. Something that would tell me they hadn't erased me completely. And there it was. Page 47. Compliance overview. The graphs I built. The frameworks I designed. The metrics I bled for. still intact, still using my name in the author field. They had gutted my role, slashed my team, rewritten my access levels like I was a relic of a dumber era. But they still needed my math, my structure, my policies. They'd kept the bones of my work and tried to paint over the name etched into the spine. It felt like standing in front of a museum exhibit labeled Anonymous Artist while holding the original sketch in your back pocket. But that's the thing about trying to erase the author. You forget she might still have the keys to the archive. I paged through the PDF with cold precision, noting every metric that had been kept, every field unchanged. I found 3 old audit samples with my initials in the header. Not one of them flagged. Not one of them edited. Sloppy, really. They were trying to remove me without realizing I'd built the duct tape holding this whole sideshow together. Then I opened the board's shared folder, the one reserved for materials the external auditor would review before the meeting, and I uploaded one last document. It was plain. 10 pages. Properly formatted. Titled, Compliance Clause 4.3.2, Policy Violation Trigger Examples. Inside, it included time-stamped screenshots from the all-hands meeting where I was accused of job hunting. Slack messages where HR joked about cleaning the deck by skipping formal investigations. Email headers marked urgent that authorized bonus adjustments without a single compliance sign-off. And at the bottom of every page, in small print, a clause I had memorized in my bones. Any performance-based bonus decision made as retaliation for unverified job-seeking activity shall render the entire bonus pool void and trigger full internal audit review. Policy. Not threat. Not opinion. Policy. I flagged the file specifically for the external auditor. Not the board. They wouldn't read it. They never did. Half of them only attended these meetings for the catered lunch and an excuse to wear a blazer. But the auditor? He was different. He was the kind of man who once caught a $6,000 discrepancy in a client's travel reimbursement and filed a 17-page report about it. He'd read it. All of it. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. A deep, slow breath left my chest like I'd been holding it for weeks, because now it was out of my hands. This wasn't a revenge story with fireworks and screaming matches. It was a chess match, and I'd just moved my queen into place. They still didn't know what was coming. The son was busy prepping for the meeting like it was a high school debate final. Probably practicing hand gestures in the mirror, trying to look like he understood half the acronyms in the deck. I imagined him smoothing his thrift store Armani knockoff blazer, practicing lines like, "We've optimized the legacy systems with a future-forward lens," or some other TikTok MBA nonsense. He thought he'd won, that I was boxed in, outdated, obsolete. But while he'd been busy performing leadership, I'd been documenting leadership failure. And now, with one flagged document sitting quietly in a folder he'd never bothered to open, his entire bonus pool was floating in gasoline. All it would take was one spark. No press release, no email bomb, just quiet exposure in a boardroom full of people who understood one thing better than loyalty: liability. As the day rolled forward, I went about my work like nothing had changed. Answered emails, approved minor vendor requests, helped Maya draft a risk checklist she'd never be allowed to implement. And every so often, I'd glance at the shared folder, waiting for the auditor's initials to appear next to my document. At 3:27 p.m., they did. He downloaded it. No comment, no follow-up, just a small icon change, a match striking stone in the dark. That's the thing about policy. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs to exist in the right hands at the right time. And I'd just passed the torch. The boardroom was colder than usual. Probably the air conditioning. Probably the tension. Probably my own pulse slowing to a crawl as the moment I'd been building toward began to unfold like a loaded script nobody else knew they were in. I sat near the back, as always. Not out of shame. Out of strategy. From the back, you see the whole stage. You hear the whispers before they turn into questions. You watch the looks pass between executives who realize they've stepped into a landmine field wearing stilettos. The son sat up front, all puffed posture and pregame smirk. He had his blazer buttoned too tight and his notes stacked on the table like trophies. He was living his fantasy. Head of HR, key player, trusted voice in front of the board. He even leaned over to whisper something to Haley, who nodded like a loyal poodle. I imagined it was something like, "Nail this and they'll never question the restructure." Or maybe, "Remember to mention the diversity dashboard." The CEO sat beside him, looking worn but attentive. Unlike his son, He understood that board meetings weren't about noise. They were about not becoming the headline in next quarter's investor call. The external auditor sat with a copy of the packet, glasses perched low, voice steady as ever. He worked his way through the departments, flipping pages, issuing brief observations. IT compliance, improved. Procurement, flagged for late submissions. Finance, within thresholds. Each summary landed like a thud, another brick in a wall of predictable monotony. Then he reached Section 4. Compliance. My section. He cleared his throat. Now, on to internal ethics metrics. Specifically, policy adherence and Clause 4 3.2. I didn't move, just folded my hands in my lap. The sun was still smiling. The auditor's eyes scanned the page, then stopped. He blinked, let out a quiet chuckle, flipped to the next page, paused. Then he laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a boardroom chuckle, a real caught-off-guard laugh, the kind that silences a room not because it's funny, but because it's wrong. Oh no, he said, tapping the page. Wow. All heads turned toward him. The sun's smile faltered. Haley froze mid-type. The CEO sat forward just an inch. The auditor slid a single printed sheet across the table. Crisp, intentional, highlighted in yellow. This, the auditor said, is quite possibly the most ironically violated clause I've reviewed this year. The CEO took the sheet, his brow furrowed as he read the top line, then the next, then the fine print at the bottom. He looked up. Who wrote this? No one spoke. So I did. 7 years ago. The room went quiet the way only power can silence a space, suddenly and absolutely. The CEO looked back down at the document. The room's collective attention followed like a tide. Clause 4 3.2, printed in simple black text. Any performance-based bonus decision made as retaliation for unverified job-seeking activity shall render the entire executive bonus pool void and trigger full internal audit review. The sun paled. Not gradually, not gracefully. It was like someone had drained the blood from his face with a straw. He leaned forward, mouth half open, clearly preparing to spin. That's not, but the CFO interrupted, voice like a hammer on glass. It's dated, filed, and active, and she's still listed as the policy's original author of record. The board chair raised an eyebrow. The CEO didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His eyes said everything. Oh my God, she wrote this. I sat still, letting the weight of the moment sink into the pores of every person in the room. Not smug, not showy, just grounded. I watched them squirm, not with glee, though there was some of that, buried deep, but with satisfaction. Like watching a slow leak finally become a burst pipe in a house you warned them to fix years ago. The son opened his mouth again, closed it. No one looked at him. The auditor flipped to the next page. I've attached examples of current violations, time-stamped, backed by message logs and document metadata. Unless rescinded with board consensus, the clause activates a full compliance audit and freezes executive bonuses pending outcome. Silence. Then paper rustling. Then the slow, inevitable shuffle of reputations recalibrating. I didn't need to say another word. I'd said enough. In documentation, in policies, in the quiet backups I made while they were too busy patting themselves on the back. Now they would scramble. Try to contextualize. Try to reframe. But it wouldn't matter. Because the moment had landed. The trigger had been pulled. And the collapse had already begun. The air in the boardroom changed the second the clause was read aloud. It was like the oxygen shifted direction. Like everyone realized all at once that something irreversible had just happened, and no one knew how to stand up without showing they were complicit. The auditor's voice, calm and dry, echoed in the silence. Any performance-based bonus decision made as retaliation for unverified job-seeking activity shall render the entire bonus pool void and trigger full internal audit review. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. The words were a scalpel, and they'd already done their work. The CEO stared at the paper like it was in a different language. His eyes scanned the paragraph again, slower this time, trying to find some loophole, some escape hatch, some asterisk that might let him climb out of the hole his son had enthusiastically dug with a spoon made of buzzwords and unchecked ego. But there was no asterisk. Only my name, printed in the lower margin. Policy authored by K. Delaney, Director of Compliance. The son, red-faced and sweating now, leaned forward, voice cracking as he scrambled. That was never meant to. We didn't. The CFO didn't even glance at him. He held up the black folder I'd handed him 2 meetings ago. Calm, deliberate, every tab labeled, every receipt documented, every page marked with signatures and version history. It's dated, the CFO said, cutting across the stammer. It's filed, it's active, and she's still your policy author of record. And then he looked at me. Not with pity, not with surprise. With respect. A thing I hadn't seen on his face in years. The board chair cleared her throat and adjusted her glasses, slow and surgical. Her tone was neutral, which somehow made it even more brutal. Karen, she said, thank you for your service. 7 words, and every one of them landed like a shovel to the son's career. There was no applause, no dramatic piano cue, just a slow, collective turning of heads away from him, and toward me. It wasn't loud, but it was absolute. The CEO folded the printout, not roughly, not angrily, just defeated. The way a man looks when he realizes the machine he built now runs without him, and worse, might just run better. The son slumped into his chair like air had been vacuumed out of his lungs. Haley, his assistant, stared straight ahead, hands folded in front of her laptop like she was praying no one would ask her a question. And the CFO? He slipped my folder into his briefcase like it was evidence in a sealed indictment. The auditor scribbled something in his notes. Then, without looking up, said, Per Clause 4.3.2, this triggers immediate audit proceedings for executive compensation decisions made Q3 through current. He paused, flipping one more page, then added, almost as an afterthought, that includes personal discretionary bonuses awarded by department heads without compliance sign-off. Those are listed on page 6. The son didn't speak again. He didn't need to. Because suddenly, it wasn't about Karen anymore. It was about every decision he'd made with that smirk on his face. Every backroom deal, every intern silenced, every cut corner signed with a wink. Now it all lived under audit review. His favorite word turned against him. And me? I didn't cry. Didn't grin. Didn't even adjust my seat. I just looked at the policy on the screen and thought, this is what a boundary looks like when it bites back. 14 years of being quiet. Of being sidelined. Of being labeled legacy. Of building the entire ethical backbone of a company only to be told I was too cautious, too procedural, too slow for modern leadership. And now the people who erased me were standing in a room built on my rules and discovering, too late, that I never left. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw a fit. I just wrote everything down. They came at me with slogans and flair. I answered with a clause. A boring, forgotten clause tucked into a manual they never bothered to read. And it burned their bonus pool to ash.